Well, shalom, my friends, and welcome to our ongoing Bible study on the book of Genesis. Today we are going to be in Genesis chapter 29. So, as we usually do, we'll spend a little bit of time in some preliminary material, provide some background to somebody who may be dropping in on this video kind of out of order with all the other ones that we have done, provide a little bit of background there. If you would prefer to jump ahead to the textual study, chapter by chapter and verse by verse, I encourage you to just hit fast forward until we get to the text. So let me go ahead and start our PowerPoint here. Lately, I have been advertising a book that recently has been published. This is a book of mine. It's called Nazarene-Essene Theology, and it's kind of a systematic theology from Genesis to Revelation, based on the belief systems and the kind of lifestyle and worldview of the Nazarene Essenes of Second Temple era fame. In my first book that I published called Yeshua, He Will Be Called a Nazarene, I make the case, hopefully persuasively, that Yeshua, Jesus, was a member of the Nazarenes, the sect of the Nazarenes, and of course was their preeminent leader. And that does not mean that he conformed to a human theology of theirs, but he really established what has come to be a biblical theology, being the second person of the Trinity, being the divine personage that he is. So you might find this book interesting. A lot of space in this book is given to the book of Genesis, and basically the history of the patriarchs. And you may be interested in the New Testament aspect of that as well. This is the dispensational chart that we've been looking at for quite some time. It's called the Age of Promise, not because God wasn't giving promises before, but because the promises of God, particularly the covenant promises of God given to the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are the central focus of this era of history. And it's kind of a turning point in history, where God's promises really become the foundation of the faith of his chosen people, and upon which they build their lives and have built a lot of history. So we see the red line of redemption going through Avram, Yitzhak, and Israel, the patriarchs, and redemption comes through a descendant of the tribe of Judah. That would be Jesus, Yeshua, Hamashiach, the Messiah. And then this period of time will come to an end with the exile in Egypt. And then, of course, the book of Exodus takes up the story of Moses and the deliverance of the Hebrew people who were enslaved there in Egypt for 4 generations. We've been looking at this map ever since about chapter 12, because it depicts the travels of Abraham. And this is significant because in the 2 texts that I have attached to this map, Genesis 13 and Genesis 15, it kind of defines the boundaries of the promised land. In Genesis 13, God told Abraham that the land he was promising to him would be defined by all the land that he would see with his eyes and walk on with his feet. In Genesis 15, it gets a little more specific, and it defines the boundaries geographically from the river of Egypt over here, the Nile River, to the great river Euphrates, which is right here. So you can see that the promised land is a pretty large piece of territory in the Middle East. And these boundaries that are discussed here in Genesis 15 are far larger than anything that biblical era Jewish people, Israelites, or the modern state of Israel has ever occupied. I've included this map because it shows a journey of Abraham and Sarah into Egypt. I probably don't even need this map anymore because I just wanted to show that their eyes saw and their feet walked in Egypt there at the Nile River. So again, this is just to emphasize the boundaries of the promised land. This map, we'll move my head here so we can read the caption, is titled The Travels of Jacob, and it involves him leaving his home in Beersheba after he had after he had schemed in such a way that his brother Esau lost his both his birthright and the blessing of the firstborn. So he travels from Beersheba up this way to. I think what we want to do is go to the larger map. So let me drop down here a little bit. Let's see. Here's where he leaves in Beersheba, travels up north towards Bethel, which formerly was called Luz, where he has a vision, an experience of God and the stairway to heaven, literally speaking. He'll continue his journeys on here, going farther north, and this smaller scale map shows him going up here to Haran, which is the family homestead. And there, in the next few chapters, Jacob is going to get married a couple of times and produce a large family. So I use this larger scale map just so we can see some of the details of the journeys that Jacob takes. In the last couple of chapters, which would be chapter 27 and 28, I have tried to suggest kind of an alternate scenario than most Bible commentators take on especially the relationship between Jacob and Esau. Because in Genesis 25:27, Jacob is described as a Tam, T-A-M in English, which, according to this lexical definition of the word Tam, it means a complete person in the sense of maturity, usually morally pious, specifically gentle, dear, perfect, plain, undefiled, upright. And the reason I included that definition is because most of us, if we were to give a definition of Jacob's character, we probably wouldn't use any of these words. But my suggestion is that based on a prophecy in Genesis 25:23 that God gave to Rebekah, even before these twin sons of hers were born, God said, the older shall serve the younger. And I have suggested that the pot of stew thing with Jacob and Esau, where Esau loses his birthright, and then the blessing thing, which involves like a masquerade, Jacob posing as Esau, was not maybe an effort on the part of certainly Rebekah, maybe Isaac, maybe Jacob was involved. I doubt if Esau was involved, but it's possible that he was too, in order to play out the events of their lives so that the older would end up serving the younger. If Esau was aware of that, he was kind of acting against his own interests. But I proposed this in Genesis 27, and then we kind of reviewed it again in 28 to see if we can possibly apply any of these very godly characteristics to Jacob, who usually, would seem to be pretty much of a dirty rat. So we'll keep this in mind. We'll keep this little scenario in mind and see if it applies to the chapter today. We've also been looking at the family tree. The genealogy of Abraham starts with his father and his brothers, Haran, Nahor, and here's Avram and his wife, Sarah. Avram, of course, was also married to Hagar, at least bore children from her. Ishmael produced the Ishmaelite people group. Sarah and Abraham produced Isaac, the promised child. Isaac was the Isaac's wife, Rebecca, produced his sons, Jacob and Esau, that are the subject of our studies here tonight. Esau would go on to produce the Edomite nation of people, and then the whole rest of the Bible is about Jacob's family, who are the Israelites. So a little bit of a spoiler alert here. In the chapter today, we're going to see that Jacob will marry both Leah and Rachel. I'm going to jump right ahead. I'm going to leave this these couple of screens on my PowerPoint until we get to that part in the text, and then I'll jump back to my PowerPoint so we can read through this material. Because this is some information from the Dake Study Bible, which gives us some insight into the chronology about when Jacob married his two wives and when, the chronology of their having children and so forth. And it turns out that if you study this carefully, it's not the way it's usually depicted in commentaries and so forth. So we'll take a look at that when we get to it. So let's go ahead and jump into our text today. This study of chapter 29 has the potential to be a pretty lengthy Bible study. So we're not going to spend a lot of time in intricate detail about this material. But let's go ahead and charge on here. Just a little bit of background material here. In the left panel of our Bible software, we've got the New King James Version in English. We have a Hebrew Bible. This is the basic BHS, the Biblica Hebraica Stuttgartensia, a scholarly volume of the Old Testament in Hebrew. We've got the Septuagint with also some study aids about vocabulary and stuff. And then we have the Dake Study Bible commentary and notes. So, verse 1, Genesis 29:1. So Yaakov went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. A couple of things here. In the Hebrew text, it says that Jacob yisa ragalav, which means he lifted up his feet. Kind of an interesting expression rather than just, going on his journey. He lifted up his feet, which most of the commentators are agreed that this demonstrates a very positive attitude on his part, especially after receiving his renewal, I should say the renewal of the Abrahamic covenant that had been passed on as a legacy from Abraham to Isaac, Jacob's father. And now during this dream sequence in Bethel, the promises of the Abrahamic covenant are secured with Jacob. And Jacob responds very favorably to this. And so, like when he wakes up in the morning, he lifts up his feet and continues on his journey. The place where he's going, and we saw that on the one map, is basically due north of the land of Canaan, the promised land. And it's pretty far to the west of what we would think of being the people of the East. And I think the way we need to interpret this is to say that the culture of the people of the East would include the whole region along the Tigris and Euphrates River, extending as far west as Haran and maybe a little bit further than that. So, this area in the northwest of the Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia, the land between the two rivers, is the source of the Euphrates River. And so, although it's kind of in the western regions of the culture and belief systems and the worldview of the people of the East. It would still count as being an Eastern culture. And it would extend all the way east to Ur of the Kasdim, Ur of the Chaldeans, where Abraham was born and where his family left to go to the Promised Land. So, verse 2, he, Jacob, looked and saw a well in the field, and behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of the well they watered the flocks. A large stone was on the mouth. I think in my PowerPoint, let me flash back to my PowerPoint here briefly. I think I included a picture of some wells. I did, that we had in one of the earlier chapters, which I believe was chapter 24. Yes, Genesis 24, where Abraham sends his servant Eleazar, not named in the text, but we know that name from other sources. The servant goes up to Haran, probably to this same location, to the family homestead, to find a son for Isaac. And he finds Rebekah, brings her back south. They get married. She and Rebekah and Isaac have kids, Jacob and Esau. And now the next generation, Jacob, is going to seek for a wife in this same territory. And since a well was mentioned in chapter 24, I included this picture here, which is a very large hole in the ground. This is a spiral staircase going down into it, which would indicate the typical size of a Middle Eastern well. And it's not I included this image of what I call a Little House on the Prairie well, where you've just got a very small opening in the ground. Probably, well, I guess what I wanted to emphasize is that I don't think biblical wells look like this. They looked more like this. So that's why I included those pictures. But from the description that we have in Genesis 29 of probably that same well where Eleazar had gone, and that was his first stop in Aram, probably the first stop of Jacob too. So a generation later, probably this same well, becomes the focal point of this chapter. But the way the well is described in the chapter today, it would be very difficult to imagine a well like this in this picture as being the kind of well that we have in our text for today. So when we get to further descriptions of that well, then we will talk about some of the possibilities of what this well actually looked like. So we saw a well in the field, 3 flocks of sheep around it. This well was, for the purpose of watering flocks of sheep, and a large stone was over the well's mouth. So, I mean, a stone large enough to cover that well I showed you in the earlier picture from Genesis 24 would just be an impossibility. There's no amount of men that would be able to move a stone that large from that well. So this well is probably something different than I described for you in Genesis 24. It might be a different well altogether, or it may be the same well that just is not the way it was depicted there. Well, let me go on and talk about some of the research I did on possibilities of this well. I looked in John Gill's commentary on this passage. There are several Bible software programs that have the commentaries of John Gill, and they're very good. He was especially good in Hebrew language. And one of the things that it said in his commentary was that he was aware of some people, I don't know if they're archaeologists or not, or historians or whatever, who discovered a well in this area where Haran was located. And it actually appeared to be a spring that, like a natural spring where water would kind of gush out of the ground without having to what, dig a well there. It would just be water that was springing out of the ground, and that there was a conduit, probably built out of stone and maybe plaster and things like that, that ran out into a field and probably produced kind of a pool or a pond. Um, but if that's the case, if I have just described the well in Genesis 29, what's the deal with the large stone? The large stone doesn't make any sense with a conduit that runs out into a field. But I would guess that if that is the arrangement that we're learning about in Genesis 29, verse 2 and following here, that what would happen is the shepherds would probably build a wall surrounding where the conduit opened into a pool or a pond or a kind of a feeding trough kind of idea. They would build a stone wall around it, and then they would have an opening where the sheep could go into what would be kind of like a corral or something, and be watered. But then, in order to protect the well from, I suppose, waste materials blowing into it in a sandstorm or something like that, or people using that well who, didn't have any right to use it, kind of water thieves, if you will. There was a round stone, a rolling stone that was placed in front of the entrance, to this surrounding wall. A surrounding wall like that is called a gedera in Hebrew. So this may have been a rolling stone, kind of like the rolling stone that was placed in front of the entrance to the tomb of Yeshua. And a stone that large that would cover a doorway would require, several big, sturdy, strong men to roll it away from the entrance. And that's what we're going to encounter. So I'm going to say that this well, at least in Genesis 29, may not be the same well as in Genesis 24, or I wrongly described the well in Genesis 24, and it should be thought more along the description I just gave for Genesis 29. The picture I showed you in the slideshow is typical of Middle Eastern biblical era wells, but this one may have been unique in being fed by a stream and so forth, with a gedera, a surrounding wall, and then a rolling stone to cover the entrance. So let's see if that fits as we continue with the next verses. Verse 3. Now all the flocks would be gathered there. In verse 2, we learned that there were already 3 flocks that were there, and they would roll the stone from the well's mouth, water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place at the well's mouth, which would be like the entrance or the gateway to the well, or to the watering area. And Yaakov said to them, that is to the shepherds that were there, the shepherds of those 3 flocks, he said, "My brethren, where are you from?" And they said, "We are from Haran." Well, that Haran is Jacob's destination. So that confirms that he's in the right place. He is in the area that he wants to be. Then he said to them, "Do you know Lavan?" And we remember from our family tree that Lavan was the brother of Rebekah, Jacob's mom, okay? And Lavan is the son of Nahor, Ben Nahor, we have here in the Hebrew. Now, actually, if we would look back at the family tree, we would see that Nahor was a brother of Avram, or Abraham, and there was an intervening generation between Nahor and Lavan. That's Bethuel. Bethuel was Rebekah and Lavan's father. But here, Lavan is called Ben Nahor, which is kind of good for us to recognize because here the word Ben, normally translated as son of Nahor, is here being used as the grandson of. Now, as far as I know, in Hebrew, there is no word for grandson. However far down the family tree you go, however many generations you travel, descendants are always called Ben, even if they're called son, even if they are a son of somebody 4 generations prior to them. So we can't take this term Ben too literally and try to insist that Nahor actually was the son of Lavan. He was the grandfather of him. So some of these biblical words have to be taken not in a real strict literal sense, but kind of loosely. And the more we learn about the Hebrew language, the more we learn that this applies in a lot of different ways. So yeah, Laban is characterized by Yaakov as the son of Nahor, and they said, we know him. So they don't challenge him and they don't say, well, he's not the son, he's the grandson. You fool, don't you know that? So they are understanding what Yaakov is saying. Verse 6. So he, Yaakov, said to them, is he well? Is Lavan well? Is he in good health? And they said, he is well. And look, they say, these 3 shepherds say, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. So here we learn that Rachel, one of Lavan's daughters, is a shepherdess. And so, she may be a shepherdess in the sense that, as the daughter of the owner of the sheep, she is just kind of overseeing. She's there in kind of an administrative role. Or she may be out there with her shepherd's rod and staff, actually hands-on taking care of the sheep and so forth. So, yeah, so here comes Rachel. Then Yaakov said to these 3 shepherds, so Rachel hasn't arrived yet with the sheep. So Yaakov carries on the conversation with these 3, the shepherds of these 3 flocks. Look, he says, it is still high day. It is not time for the cattle to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go and feed them. So, you know, I'm not sure why he would say this. Um, I mean, it would seem that these shepherds would know what they're doing. They've been doing it every day, probably all of their adult lives. They gather together every day at this time of the day, and they wait till all the flocks of sheep are together, including Rachel's. She hasn't arrived yet, so they were waiting for her to arrive so they would have enough people to roll the stone away. So I don't know why Yaakov is challenging the time of day. Still high day. It is Yom Gadol. It is yet Yom Gadol. And he says it's not the time for gathering of the flocks. So, like I say, I don't know why he challenged that, but anyway, the response that these shepherds give is we cannot. In other words, we can't send our flocks out into the pasture land until all the flocks gather together, so we can water the sheep as we normally do. So they said we cannot, that is, send the flocks out to pasture until all the flocks are gathered together and they have rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and then we water the sheep. Now, while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. A ro'ah. A ro'i is a male shepherd. A ro'ah is a female shepherd. And it came to pass when Yaakov saw Rachel, the daughter of Lavan, his mother's brother. So there it gets, pretty specific. And the sheep of Lavan, his mother's brother, that Yaakov went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Lavan, his mother's brother. So these shepherds of the three flocks gathered together um, are waiting around for all the sheep to be gathered together. Rachel finally shows up. That may be all the flocks they're waiting for. But they were waiting for this to happen so they would have enough manpower to roll the stone away. Well, Yaakov takes one look at Rachel and apparently has an adrenaline rush. So he is strong enough all by himself to roll the stone away and make a path for all the flocks to be watered. So that may give you some indication of the impact that his that his first view of Rachel, what it did for him. And we'll get a description here of Rachel in just a minute. So verse 11, then Yaakov kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. Now, the word for kiss here in the Hebrew is here in this context it's yishach, but the root word is nashach. And this can mean anything from a cordial kiss on the cheek, which even in a non-homosexual way, two men can do, or two women can do, with no hint of anything inappropriate. Or this can also be the word for a very romantic kiss. So I'll leave it up to you which you think this is, whether this is just a cordial greeting or whether this is an expression of Jacob's kind of being head over heels in love. So he kisses her and then he lifts up his voice and he wept. Baka in Hebrew, he wept, he cried about it. Now, if there are any young men out there watching this video, I want to encourage you as an older man, if you are courting women and after your first kiss, you lift up your voice and start crying, that's probably not going to work out very well for you. But I don't know, maybe the culture in the biblical era was different than it is now. It's going to work out okay for Yaakov, and we're all happy about that. But he definitely loves her. And verse 12, and Yaakov told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rivka's son. So she ran and told her father. Now, I have been calling Rachel, which is the English version, by her Hebrew name, Rachel. And when I was a young man, there was a famous movie star named Raquel Welch. Well, everybody thought Rachel was a pretty exotic name. There were lots of Rachels around, but there was only one Rachel that I knew of. And she was, let me just say, she was very attractive. She was a very appealing, a very appealing woman. And so that's why I have no trouble remembering how to say Rachel's name in Hebrew, because of Rachel Welch was her name. And Rachel Welch was drop dead gorgeous. And we're going to find out that this biblical Rachel was also very attractive. So Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative. The term here is achi. In other words, Lavan is my achi. He's my brother. But he's not. He's his uncle. So again, these relationship terms like ben, son, and achi, my brother, are used very loosely with family relationships. They are related, so relative is probably a good translation, but it's not literal. Her father's relative, his brother. and that he was Rivka's son. So Jacob, I mean, Rachel obviously knew about Rivka. She's been gone for a while, but knew about her. And Yaakov is saying, well, she's my mom. So she, Rachel, ran and told her father. Then it came to pass when Lavan heard the report about Yaakov, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced and kissed him. Here we've got Nashach again. So this is Lavan greeting Yaakov with a kiss, probably not the same kind of kiss that that Yaakov gave Rachel. This is your cordial, formal greeting, and completely appropriate in the culture of that day. And so he kissed him and brought him to his house, Lavan's house. Yaakov, told Lavan all these things, the relationships and why he came north. He's in search of a wife. Verse 14, and Lavan said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh. So etzem and basar in Hebrew, and he stayed with him for a month. Now this month, it's worthy of taking note. So, when the servant went north in chapter 24, I think he was only in the household of the extended family for a couple of days, for just a short time. But Yaakov is staying there for a month with them. And of course, he's on the hunt for a wife, but we already have a clue who he's interested in and who he's going to be courting. Then Lavan said to Yaakov, and I assume this is after he's been there for a month, but it could be even at the beginning of the month that he stayed there. Because you are my relative, because you are my achi, you're my brother, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be? Now, interestingly here, the word for nothing is the Hebrew word chinam, and the root word is chinam. This is the word for grace. Grace is like a gift that God gives you for nothing. We're saved by grace through faith, not of works, not by our effort, not by our having earned it. So the word hinam or chen, shortened form of that in Hebrew, means for nothing. So a lot of times when the Bible uses the term chen, it's talking about God's grace and how he gives you stuff for nothing. Sometimes chinam is the way we say, like we talk about the for nothing part. It literally means for nothing. There is a kind of prayer called hinam in Hebrew. So if you pray a hinam prayer in Hebrew, you're praying either for yourself or someone else that they would receive God's grace, chen, for nothing, that they haven't done anything to earn or deserve what you're praying for them, including yourself, but you're asking God to do it for nothing. So that's the significance of that. So Lavan doesn't think it's appropriate that Jacob, continue to serve him for no pay. So he says, what should your wages be? So Jacob kind of gets to either set or suggest what his wages will be. Now, Lavan had two daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. And we'll get on to the description of the two here. Leah, the elder daughter, it says her eyes were delicate. Rachot could also be translated tender. But Rachel was beautiful, Yafeh in Hebrew, of form. Toar is like, how do I put this delicately? Like her shape, her figure, okay? So she was well built, nicely built. And according to her appearance, her mare, ra'ah in Hebrew means to look at, so her physical appearance. So she had a nice shape, and her features were very beautiful. So let's talk a little bit about the two names. Rachel in Hebrew means a little ewe lamb. I know in the information window at the bottom of the page, whenever we have a proper name, it just translates the name for us. It's Rachel, um, which doesn't help with the meaning of names, which is kind of interesting sometimes. So here we have Leah's name, and down at the bottom it just says Leah. So what does Leah mean? Well, it means it's the Hebrew word for a cow, or or particularly a cow's eyes. Now, I'll leave it up to you to compare a precious, beautiful little ewe lamb with a cow. And that may tell you something about at least the physical, the outward appearance of these two sisters, and why maybe Yaakov was attracted to one and not the other. And I'm not just trying to be very shallow, about the appearance of these girls, because here's a spoiler alert: Jacob's going to end up married to both of them through not completely above board circumstances. But he's going to end up married to both of them. And Rachel is always going to be very apparently his favorite wife. And Leah is going to feel really down in the dumps about this, because she's going to be very much aware that she is not her husband's favorite wife. Now, Yaakov loved Rachel, so he said, and this is in answer to Lavan's question about, what would you suggest, or why don't you go ahead and set your own wages? So here's what Jacob says. He says, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. Now, the Bible talks about bride prices. I've read some different things about the cultural explanation for the concept of a bride price. But one of the most common explanations is that when in an agricultural society like the Middle East was at this time, if a man and his wife gave birth to sons, these sons were going to grow up to be farmhands. So they would be a physical asset to the family business of farming or raising sheep, or, whatever they were doing. But when you had girls, about the only value that a girl had to the family was, since she wouldn't be working out in the fields, or she wouldn't be keeping sheep. And having said that, I know this chapter tells us that Rachel was a shepherdess. And it appears that Lavan only had daughters. I don't think any sons are mentioned here. So he's in a tight situation. He may have been forced to teach his daughters how to be shepherdesses. But normally the value to the father would be the bride price that he could get from a prospective bridegroom. So, the prospective bridegroom would be expected to to pay the father a certain amount of money, and it would either be money, or flocks or herds, or a certain amount of crops or something like that, in exchange for his daughter. So the daughter's dad had to make some money on this deal, and Jacob is saying, I'll serve you for 7 years if I can have your daughter's hand, Rachel's hand, in marriage, the younger daughter. And Lavan says, it is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to another man. Stay with me. Now, it may be that Lavan feels the same way about the local men in the community. They're probably pagans. They don't worship the God of the Bible. So he may be very happy to marry his daughter off to a man who is part of their extended family. and who's not going to lead her into paganism. He's probably going to treat her well because he knows the God of the Bible, and so forth. And we know that Jacob's parents feel this way about the local girls down there in the land of Canaan. They did not want their sons to be marrying those local girls. So this may be what Lavan means when it's better that I give her to you than to another man, like one of the local guys around here. So Yaakov served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. Now, if we go over here to the Dake Study Bible part of our Bible software program here, you can see that if we scroll down, there's a section in here that's where Dake says, he has a section entitled Four Proofs That Jacob Took His Wives Immediately. So what's going to happen here is Laban is going to make a deal with Jacob for his service of 7 years to get Rachel as his bride. Here's another spoiler alert. He's going to get tricked. He's going to wake up the day after his wedding with Leah instead of Rachel. So there's been a switch made here, and Jacob knew nothing about it. And so Jacob goes to Laban and he says, like, you tricked me. I agreed to work with you for 7 years, and you gave me the wrong daughter. And then Laban is going to explain to him that culturally, he's kind of not allowed to marry off the younger daughter first and then the older daughter. So he gave him first Leah, and then, he says, now, I'd be pleased to have you go ahead and take Rachel as your bride since my oldest daughter is married. And Jacob is going to agree to work for, he's already got a 7-year contract, and the girl he ended up with, Leah. So he's going to have to work 7 years for Leah. And then if he wants Rachel, he's going to have to work another 7 years. So Lavan's going to get 14 years out of him instead of the 7 that he agreed to. But he loves, what does this say? They seemed only a few years ago because of his love for her. So he's going to love her so much that he's going to be willing to do the 14 years. So it appears, just from a surface reading of this text, that Jacob is going to work 7 years with no wives. At the end of that 7 years, he thought he was going to get Rachel, but he gets Leah. So he marries Leah at the end of the first 7 years. Then at the end of the second 7 years, or the end of 14 total years, he's going to get Rachel. That's the way it appears from a surface reading of the text, but it doesn't work in the chronology. So let me jump back to my PowerPoint here, and we will read through this material that Dake wrote. And I honestly think it is it's right on. I think this is exactly what we should learn about the timetable here. What he's going to suggest, what Dake is going to suggest with this material, is that Jacob maybe worked a very short period of his time, kind of as a down payment for Rachel, and he got her at the end of that down payment time. And then he was obligated to work for the full 7 years. He thought he was getting Rachel, but he ends up getting Leah. So there's another 7 years, but that he would have gotten Rachel not at the end of the first 7-year period, but very shortly after his wedding, in which he actually received Leah. That may be kind of confusing, but I think this is the only way we can interpret this. So in Genesis 29:21, Jacob did not say, give me my wife, for my years are fulfilled. He said plainly, for my days are fulfilled. Whoops. Yeah. Implying a certain number of days from the time the contract was made until he could actually have Rachel. The number was always left up to the contracting parties. It couldn't have been 7 years to fulfill the marriage contract. And he's going to go on to show why that is. These years of service were the total dowry or bride price, not the customary waiting period. The few days could have been the month of Genesis 29:14, which we read in the text. And Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him for a month. So it could have been at the end of the month. And the contract could have been made at the beginning of these 30 days. So that's what I said when we read verse 14. I said, this sounds like it came at the end of the month where Laban says, you know, set your salary and I'll pay you that. Or it could have been at the beginning of the month, and the expectation was that the coming month that he would serve would be the time of the what I was calling it the down payment. That's probably a poor term. Oops, I went too fast there. So from Genesis 29:27 through 30, we learn that Jacob received both wives within a week of each other. Regarding Leah, he was to fulfill her week. That's what Genesis 27 says. Then Rachel would be given to him. Genesis 29:28 says, Jacob did so and fulfilled her week. And Laban gave him Rachel, his daughter, to wife also. Since Leah became his wife at the beginning of the 14-year dowry period, 7 years for Leah, 7 years for Rachel, we know that Rachel became his wife at this time also. So Laban, Dave is suggesting that Jacob worked the agreed for down payment period of time, which was a week. It says so in 2 verses. Fulfill her week, fulfill her week. So Dake is suggesting that there was, at the end of that week, there was a wedding. He got Leah. Then there was another week and another wedding, and he got Rachel. So, okay, let's go down another explanation for why this is the way we ought to understand it. I'm moving my my face box down a little bit so I can read the text. I don't know if that's going to show up in the video or not. It is unreasonable to believe that Jacob received Leah and Rachel a week later at the end of the first 7-year period, because that wouldn't give enough time for so many children to be born. We know that Jacob and it turns out to be 4 wives, or 2 wives and 2 concubines. There just isn't enough time for them to be born, for all those children to be born, unless Jacob received both wives very early on in the total period that he was in Haran. Yaakov's last son before returning to Canaan was Yosef. He was the second to last one born. He was born in the 14th year of his father's 20-year stay in Haran. The text tells us that. At his birth, Yaakov desired to return to Canaan, but was persuaded to remain 6 more years. So we've got a 7-year period for Leah, a 7-year period for Rachel. That's 14 years. Joseph was born then, and then 6 years later, so he would work another 6 years and leave at the end of that 6th year. And here are the Bible texts that back that up. We know then that all the other children had to be born in either a 7-year period or a 14-year period. These facts establish it as a full 14-year period. Leah herself had 7 children, 6 sons and a daughter, before Yosef was born. Furthermore, she had a period when she left bearing after having 4 sons. During this unfruitful time, the time when Leah was unfruitful or was barren, which was at least 2 years, she gave Zilpah, her maid, to Yaakov, that she might have more children through her. Zilpah bore 2 sons before Leah herself began to bear again. It's impossible to account for Leah's 7 children in a 2-year unfruitful period in 7 years. Therefore, Yaakov received his wives at the beginning of the entire 14-year dowry period. Now, as I read that, I agree. There's no other way to read this text and put all those children in a 7-year period. 14 years, it works out fine, but 7 years just doesn't work. And then the fourth reason is Judah, who was, I think, the third or fourth born to Leah, couldn't have been born in the second 7 years for the events of Genesis 38, which relate to his life and took place before his family went down into Egypt, and that took place in Canaan, required more time. Jacob was 97 when they left Haran, and 130 when they entered Egypt, according to these texts of Scripture. This gave the family only 33 years in Canaan. During that 33-year period of time, Judah married and had a son named who took a wife and then died. So in that 33-year period of time, Judah has a son who grows up to be marriageable age. And if you take 7 years away from that time, there's just not enough time for that to happen. Supposing Er's widow, let's see, supposing Er's widow to be a harlot, that is, she wasn't a harlot. Her name was Tamar, and she's in the genealogy of Yeshua. Supposing her to be a harlot, she wasn't. Yehuda later went to her, and she gave birth to twins by him. According to Genesis 46:12, those twins were old enough for one of them, Peretz, to be married and have two sons by the time the whole tribe moved. Followed Yosef into Egypt. Judah, the fourth son, was perhaps born in the 5th year of Yaakov's married life to Leah, his mom. Figuring that Jacob took his wives in the first of the 7 years of his 20-year stay in Haran, and judging that Judah was born at the end of the first 5 years, it would make his fourth son 15 when his father took him to Canaan. His 15 years added to the 33 years the family stayed in Canaan would allow a total of 48 years for these 4 generations to come into being. Judah, Peretz, and the 2 sons of Peretz. Judah, and Peretz would be around 15 or 16 years old at marriage. However, if Judah's birth was in the second 7 years, he would have been 8 instead of 15 when he went to Canaan, forcing all these births and marriages into a 41-year period of time, which is not enough time. And again, I agree that is the case. So I think Dake is right about this. And the chronology just insists that we interpret it that way. But I think you'll find very few commentators that will look at it that way. And I wanted to look at that chronology from this point, because as we follow the rest of the story of Jacob and his wives there in Aram, I want you to have that in the back of your mind so it will make sense to you. So Yaakov served 7 years for Rachel. Seemed only a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Yaakov said to Lavan, "Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled. My days are fulfilled, not my years. Then I may go into her." That is, that we may, consummate our marriage. And Lavan gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. So this is the wedding ceremony. Now it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to Yaakov, and he went in to her. Now, it sounds like, from just a surface reading of verse 23, that Lavan was right up front with him and, gave him to Leah, and he knew it was Leah, and he slept with her, but then after he slept with her, he didn't like her. But I think there was some subterfuge here. I think there was some sneakiness involved. So my scenario for this is that there's a big wedding ceremony. And of course, there's a lot of drinking at a wedding ceremony. Remember that in the wedding ceremony that Jesus attended in Cana in Galilee, Cana of Galilee, that they ran out of wine and Jesus had to make was it 6 stone water pots full of water that he turned into wine. So there's a lot of drinking involved. So I'm thinking when Yaakov went to bed, probably in his tent that he had there, because look, shepherds lived in tents. He probably did not live in a stone house, because if you're a shepherd, you have to wander from place to place because the pastures will get worn out after a certain period of time. So they have to be very mobile. So Yaakov was probably living in a tent. And, at the end of the wedding reception, he went to his tent and his bride was there. He thought it was Rachel. She may have had a veil on, or he may have just been so drunk that he just kind of passed out. And, who knows what happened. But he's going to be surprised in the morning when it's not Rachel. So it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to Yaakov, and he went into her. Means he had sex with her. And Lavan gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. So it's a 2-for-1 deal. So it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why have you deceived me?" So Jacob did not understand that this was the case. Either Laban took advantage of his drunkenness, or he was just sneaky. And I doubt if there were lights in the tent, so it was probably a lot of touchy-feely kind of finding your way around your new bride and your new husband. And he wakes up in the morning when there's some light, and he realizes what has been done, and he's not happy about it. And Lavan said, "It must not be done so in our country, to give the younger before the firstborn." So Lavan is telling Yaakov that it's a birth order thing. If you have an older daughter, she has to be married off first before the younger can be married off. And I just want to tell a little personal story, a little personal testimony. When my wife and I got married, I married the third child of a 4-child family. So Marcia, my wife, she had an older sister who was the oldest. She had an older brother, and then she had a younger sister. So she was third in the birth order, and she was the second oldest daughter. And when we got married, because her older sister and older brother had not been married yet, they had a ceremony there at the wedding reception where her older sister and her older brother had to do like dance a jig in the pig trough. So, I mean, they got a pig trough, like a pig feeding trough, and brought it into our reception. And we had square dancing in the wedding reception. And so my wife Marcia's older sister and older brother had to do a little dance a jig in the pig trough. So that custom of what? Anticipating that the older siblings would be married before the younger siblings extended, into my lifetime. Fortunately, I did not have to marry Marcia's older sister. She's a wonderful person, and she'd be great to be married to. Her husband is very happy. But I think it would be more anti-cultural for me to have had 2 wives than to have married the younger of a 4-sibling family. Okay. So Laban said, he gives the birth order excuse. And then verse 27, he says, "Fulfill her week, and we will give you this one also for the service which you will serve me with still another 7 years." So this is going to work out well for Lavan. He's got Yaakov tied down to a marriage contract to work now for a total of 14 years to get the bride that he wants, that he prefers. Then Yaakov did so and fulfilled her week. So again, the week appears to be the down payment time. He's already worked a week for Lavan for what turned out to be Leah. Now he's going to work another week for a total of 2 weeks out of 14 years, total years that he's obligated to work, but he's going to get Rachel a week after he gets Leah. And Lavan gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as a maid. So Yaakov is going to end up with 2 wives and 2 maidservants. I don't know if concubines is the right term to use, but he's going to end up sleeping with these 2 concubines and producing, I think each of them had 2 sons. So 4 of his sons are going to come from these concubines. Then Yaakov also went into Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah. So I don't know, maybe I should highlight this because that is really important in the upcoming chapters. The preference that Jacob had for Rachel over Leah. And this is one reason why polygamous marriages are not a good idea. You know, couples or triples or quadruples or, you know, whatever arrangement you've got in polygamy, they may go into these relationships thinking that, oh, we all love each other and respect each other, so there's not going to be any favoritism and everybody's going to be treated equally. But people are sinful and it doesn't happen that way. And we're going to see that play out in Jacob's marriages. So he served with Laban another 7 years for a total of 14. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So the Lord involves himself. He intervenes in this situation. He's able to look into everybody's heart and he knows how everybody's feeling. He knows how Yaakov is feeling. He knows how Rachel is feeling and he knows how Leah is feeling. And he kind of tries to balance things out. So he allows Leah to conceive and give birth to children, but Rachel remains barren. And so the strategy here, the thought here is that when Leah begins bearing children for Jacob, Jacob will love her, if only for that. But it's not going to pan out that way. I mean, it's a good idea that God had, but it's not gonna work out that way. So Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuven. Um, for she said, the Lord has surely looked on my affliction. The word looked is ra'ah, resh aleph hey in Hebrew. And Reuben's name also has, well, it sort of has that 3-letter root. It is resh aleph. And the 3rd letter, hey or H, oftentimes drops out. So the Hebrew grammatical thing is when you have the 3rd letter in the root is a hey, it goes away. And that's what it does here. So then the ben part, the last 2 letters here, bet and nun, have to do with a son. So she calls her name Reuven, which is related to the word for God looked on her affliction. So she understands what the Lord is doing. She understands that the Lord knows she's unloved and has given her an advantage here so that she will be loved. So she goes on to say, now therefore my husband will love me. Turns out that's wishful thinking. Because she is not going to be a very happy person in this marriage. Then she conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Shimon. The 3-letter root word in Shimon is Shin, Mem, Ein. And let's see, the Lord has heard that I am loved. So we have Sheen, Mem, Ayin, same three-letter root. So Shimon's name means, like, God has heard that I am unloved. Either an angel like report, if we take this real literally, maybe an angel reported it to him, or like God has heard her prayers. Maybe, when she prays to the Lord, she prays about the fact that she's unloved. So maybe the Lord heard it from her. And she acknowledges God has heard her prayers or the report, and hopes that this will make her husband love her. She conceived again and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me because I have borne him three sons. Therefore, his name, the child's name, was called Levi. And the root letters in Levi's name, Levi in English, are Lamed, it's an L, Vav, it's a V sound, and a Yod. And up here, the word for attached is Lamed, Vav, and the Yod goes away, but the Hey takes its place. Okay. So the word Levi means attached or joined. Okay. Levi is going to be the ancestor of the priests and the Levites. So they will be the religious tribe. They won't inherit any land in the promised land, but they will have the special privilege of running the temple, tabernacle and temple complex, and being God's priests and servants. And she conceived again and bore a son and said, now I will praise the Lord. So I need to get my Hebrew up here a little bit more. She says, now I will praise the Lord. Odeh is how you say praise. The aleph at the beginning here means I will praise. It takes the place of a hey. Then you've got vav and dalet, or a V sound and a D sound. So she called his name Yehuda. So if we go to the name Yehuda here, we've got a yod that's a third person prefix. Then we've got the hey, the vav, and the dalet. So Yehuda's name means praise. And in a way, this may reflect a change of heart on Leah's part. She's been down in the dumps because she's had three kids and her husband doesn't love her. And now she has a child, and it sounds like she's going, I'm just going to praise the Lord anyway. God is good to me. He's given me these four precious children. And so I'm just going to praise him. But then she stopped bearing. And she may have understood, well, all this childbearing is not doing me any good. So, I mean, it may be that she was not, that she was trying to have children, more children, and wasn't able to, or maybe she just thought, I'm going to turn my attention to my kids and kind of ignore my husband. And so she stopped having kids by her decision. I'm not going to try to win my husband over anymore. I'm going to praise the Lord. I'm going to serve the Lord and love on these kids. And then she stopped bearing. But after a few years of not bearing any kids, then she has some more kids. She has two more or three more, two more, I think. And that's the end of the chapter. So that's where we're going to stop. But the story is not over. The story is not over. So when we pick it up when we pick it up next time in chapter 30, we're going to get Rachel's side of this. And, she knows that Jacob loves her, but she's not able to have any kids. And she's very depressed about it. So the first verse in chapter 30 is Rachel prays, give me children or else I die. These are two very unhappy women in this household. So again, I think this is a powerful argument. I know this is just anecdotal, but I think this is a powerful argument against polygamy, for one thing, but also about repeated divorce and remarriage. A lot of times in your first marriage, one of the spouses, it's usually the guy, is dissatisfied with his wife, and maybe he's attracted to some other woman and thinks, if I could just be married to this other woman. He gets a divorce from his first wife. He marries the second wife. He becomes dissatisfied with her too, because nobody's perfect. No wife is perfect. And you get mad at them and you get disappointed. And some guys and some women will go through this cycle repeatedly, 2 times, 3 times, maybe 4 times, trying to find a marriage that's going to work for them. And it doesn't. And these wives that you divorce don't just disappear. They remain a part of your life, especially if you've had children by them. So a lot of people seek a happy marriage and they don't find it. So they just keep seeking. They keep getting married and remarried, and they just never find happiness, because not only is it pretty much impossible to find that marriage they're looking for, but also their lives get so complicated because all of these wives that they have been married to are kind of in competition with each other. And if their husband is not comparing the different women he's been married to, they think he is. So marriage can be very complicated. And I think maybe the best advice that we could have on marriage, especially if you're struggling with a marriage, is be like Leah. Try all you can do to make your spouse love you. But if he doesn't love you, then continue to serve him faithfully as a spouse, or her faithfully as a spouse, and just praise the Lord. Focus on your kids, but focus mainly on the Lord, your relationship with the Lord. The Lord will never fail you, and he will give you joy and happiness, and he'll give you strength to get through the challenges of your circumstances. So if you find yourself struggling in a marriage, turn to the Lord, seek his face, praise him, and see if he won't lead you into a happy life. And it may be that once you stop trying to find happiness in marriage, it may just fall on you. If you treat your spouse with respect and dignity and love, undeserved love, it may be that this relationship can work out. Don't try to change each other. Don't try to win arguments with each other. So we'll get more into this marriage dynamic in the next chapter, probably the next few chapters. And we'll see the troubles that plague this family and this relationship. And we'll see the good that the Lord brings out of it. So let me give you the Old Testament priestly blessing from Numbers chapter 6. We'll just do it in English tonight. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. In Jesus' name. Hope you'll join us for chapter 30 next time.